Everybody ready?
Yes.
Coffee. On most days, that's the first word that comes into my mind after I wake up. And the one thing that propels me out of bed on days that I have nothing exciting planned. Coffee is one of the most popular beverages in the world, with about 2.5 billion cups of it consumed every day. I'm sure that at least a few of you here in this room are also addicted to coffee to a certain degree. And I'm sure that you can share my sentiment. But instead of professing my love for coffee today, I'll take a shallow dive into the dark history of it. Men have been consuming coffee for at least 700 years. Coffee plant is native to Africa, where it was first documented for its stimulating property. Coffee was first introduced to Europe in the 16th century, and coffee culture was born as coffee houses grew popular in the cultural and economic centers of Europe at the time, namely Vienna, Paris, London, and Venice. Coffee, or to be more specific, coffee houses, played an important role in history. Many scholars, activists, and figures who later made history were frequent guests at local coffee houses, like General Charles de Gaulle, Voltaire, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, just to name a few. Coffee houses were the place where debates and discussions were had, ideas were born, and information was exchanged. Even big companies like the East India Company and the London Stock Exchange began as coffee houses. In the 17th and 18th century, coffee houses in the UK were sometimes nicknamed Penny University because one could spend a penny to buy a cup of coffee and sit there all day to listen to the most intelligent people in the country talk. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that the Age of Enlightenment started in these European coffee houses. In Europe, the introduction of coffee spelled revolution. Coffee became the most radical drink in the world, as its function was to make people think. And when people began to think, they became dangerous to tyrants. Ironically, while coffee freed the Europeans from their tyrants, it brought tyranny and abuse elsewhere. You see, the Europeans had become dependent on a product that comes from a tropical plant that cannot grow in Europe, and realized that there is profit to be made from coffee. The pursuit of coffee supplies soon became desperate. Starting in the late 1700s, European companies imported slaves from Africa to work on plantations in Asia and the Americas and the Caribbean, as the climate in these regions were suitable for coffee plant growth, and the then great powers had already established colonies there. Many slaves who were forced to work on these coffee plantations were transported through the infamous Transatlantic slave trade, where they were first kidnapped, captured as prisoners of war, or sentenced to slavery, and then exchanged by slave dealers or tribal chiefs with European slave ship operators for goods such as alcohol, clothing, or ironware. The captured slaves were then transported to the Americas on slave ships, where the conditions were so horrendous that less than 80% of them would make it to the destination alive. In addition, African slaves were not the only ones working on the coffee plantations. Local indigenous peoples, such as the Mayans, were sometimes also forced to work as semi-slaves. Rebellions were common during these times, and oppression was often the response. Coffee is a big part of our culture and an essential part of daily life for many people. But the history of coffee is written with the blood, sweat, and tears of the slaves who were forced to work under insufferable conditions and received inhumane treatment. Even to this day, there are still plantations that employ child laborers, pay their workers next to nothing, and force them to work long hours without time off. Efforts are still being made to ensure workers in the coffee supply chain are treated fairly. So I hope that you keep the history of coffee close to your heart. And when it comes time to stock up on coffee again, do a little research, see where and who your coffee comes from, and buy fair trade if you can. Thank you.